University of New Mexico School of Law Clinical Legal Education Series. I'm Carol Suzuki. I teach at the law school. We're grateful for the support of the Leifer Foundation Border Justice Initiative to host these presentations. We are recording this session. Please keep your mic on mute and your video off. This session is approved for 1 New Mexico General Minimum Continuing Legal Education credit. When you registered, you should have received a CLE form. If you would like New Mexico CLE credit or a certificate of attendance to report to another jurisdiction, please return the form to Sue George, whose contact information is on the form. If you do not have a CLE form and you would like CLE credit or a certificate of attendance, please email Cheryl Burbank. She will put her email address in the chat. If you'd like to volunteer to assist organizations that help immigrants or would like more information after this presentation, please email Patrick Lopez in the Law School's Student and Career Services office. His email address will be placed in the chat. This is our last CLE presentation of this free summer series. I'm sure you got more than your money's worth. Through the Leifer Foundation Border Justice Initiative, the University of New Mexico School of Law plans to host more CLE presentations for the fall semester, so please stay tuned. We will have opportunities for questions and answers. If you have any questions during the presentation for the speaker, please write them in the chat, and Patrick will ask Brooke your questions during the presentation. I would like to introduce Brooke Bischoff. She is the managing attorney of Las Americas Immigration Advocacy Center, a nonprofit organization based in El Paso, Texas, that provides free and low-cost legal services to immigrants and refugees in West Texas and New Mexico. Las Americas has served over 30,000 people from over 80 countries since its start in 1987. Brooke specializes in non-detained deportation defense. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Cultural Studies from Prescott College and then her JD from the Northeastern University School of Law in 2016 with a concentration in poverty law. Prior to Las Americas, Brooke was awarded an Equal Justice Works Fellowship with the Texas Civil Rights Project. Today, Brooke will speak with us about opportunities to get involved at the border. Welcome, Brooke, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you all, and I'm really excited to introduce more people to Las Americas and the opportunities for everyone to get involved down here on the border. I know that you all have been working on some amazing training, and now you are all immigration experts. So now, if you have attended these previous CLEs, I'm really excited to plug you into the work that we are doing at Las Americas. And so I'm specifically going to be talking about how you can be involved at Las Americas, but also how you can be involved if perhaps you don't have the time to commit to full-on volunteering, either in person or remotely, or if you're interested in volunteering with a different organization. I've compiled many of the organizations that we work with in order to give everyone an opportunity to hopefully plug in what you've learned and come out of it with some actionable, concrete steps that you can take to leverage your power as legal professionals into action on the border. So that was a lovely introduction, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about what Las Americas does and the need that we're trying to meet down here on the border. So as I'm sure you may have learned, immigrants with attorneys are so much more likely to be successful in their cases. And this is really at the core of what Las Americas is trying to do. People are 4 times more likely to be released from detention if they have an attorney. They're more than 11 times more likely to actually pursue relief for which they're eligible if they have an attorney. For example, someone who doesn't have an attorney might not know that there's a legal way for them to stay in the United States. And so having an attorney allows people to understand their options, and that translates into more people actually applying for those options than people who are going through the immigration process by themselves. And then, of course, most importantly, people with an attorney are 5 times more likely to actually win their immigration cases. And so the problem is that because immigration counsel is not guaranteed, people are having to obtain their own attorneys, right? And for most people, especially on the border, it is just a financial impossibility. So 37% of people in removal proceedings have counsel. Only 14% of people who are detained and in removal proceedings have counsel. And that number goes down all the way to 5% for people who are in MPP, which is the Remain in Mexico program. Only 5% of people who are waiting for their asylum hearings in Mexico have counsel. And so these numbers are just really, really low, and that's the gap we're trying to close. And in order to do that, we depend greatly on volunteers, both pro bono attorneys and law students. So I want to talk about a bunch of the things that we do, a bunch of the ways you can plug in. We fortunately, as an organization, have adapted to be really flexible with how people are able to plug in with us and the work that they do with us. So I'm really hoping that everyone walks away from this CLE with some type of concrete step that you can take next to be involved, whether that's anything from something as small as following some of these organizations on social media to signing up to become a full-fledged, permanent volunteer. So we had a little introduction to Las Americas, but I wanted to play this video for you that gives just a quick overview of the organization and the type of work that we're doing. I believe the sound should work, but if you all could please let me know if you don't hear anything.
Brooke, it seems like there's no sound.
No sound. Let me see if I can switch my settings here. My apologies. We'll always deal with some technical trouble. Is that any better?
Yes, there's sound now.
Perfect. Thank you. Whoops.
I feel like as practitioners before we were able to tell them, you have a good case, and now we can't do that.
Under the Clinton administration is when we really saw immigration policy starting to shift.
There is too much of it, and we must do much more to stop it.
The laws governing the immigration system aren't working.
We have an immigration system that's out of date and badly broken.
Under President Obama, the target was serious criminals. Now, anyone an immigration officer deems a risk to public safety could be targeted too.
We're an organization that is dedicated to the needs of migrants, and our jobs have never been harder.
The tension at the border reaching a boiling point as protesters and politicians demand change.
From the shadow of the Statue of Liberty to the gates of the White House,
Las Americas has never stopped working.
President Trump is expected to end DACA.
The policy of family separation, the controversial Remain in Mexico policy.
Angry about images of children in detention centers in cages.
Is this policy used as a deterrent?
Yes, hopefully people will get the message.
This is being done to weaponize migrants. This is being done to advance an agenda of racism and xenophobia.
We're simply a law enforcement agency that's taking a sworn duty to enforce laws in this country.
And as we are all living in this pandemic, we are the closest we'll ever come to the refugee experience.
Okay, I'm on my way.
They've been at the forefront of the crisis.
Like a river, shut your mouth.
The ability for Las Americas to be a first responder and to just adapt to everything that's thrown at it is definitely one of our strengths. The Las Americas team is incredibly dedicated, passionate, motivated, incredibly empathetic to just the most vulnerable and horrific and traumatizing of situations. And they take so many things just in stride. They work through a lot of the secondary trauma that we're all absorbing as we continue to engage in this direct representation. I'm just so incredibly proud of the team and how they carry themselves and represent themselves. And we've never once given up. We've never said, that's it, you know what, we're not going to continue to serve anymore because it's too hard. We just continue to figure out how do we do even better than we're doing now.
So that's just a little overview from our comms person. There's like a giant green box in the middle of my screen, and I don't know if anyone else can see it, but I apologize for it, and I don't know how to get rid of it, but hopefully you can look around it. But it is at least on my end. So I apologize for that. I wanted to share that video because a lot of the people that are featured in it are our volunteers. Jesse says my screen is very zoomed in. That's probably why this box may be like zooming in. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Is that better? There we go. I knew we'd figure it out eventually. Sorry about that. Sorry you watched the video very, very zoomed in, but I appreciate you all bearing with me in our new technological realities. So I wanted to share that short video, and I'll post a link to it in the chat afterwards so that folks who didn't get a chance to see it can watch it. But the reason I wanted to share that is because so many of the people we work with every single year are volunteers. And so our volunteers are everyone from people who have been volunteering with us literally for more than a decade to people who have a couple days to spare and have some legal background and want to come in and do what they can either remotely or in person in that brief time that they have available. So really our goal is to plug in as many people as possible, regardless of whether you are someone who can commit a certain number of hours per week or who is a one-off volunteer who really just wants to do something concrete and then, go back to day-to-day life. Let's see here. So last year, with the help of our volunteers, we were able to help more than 1,300 people by providing legal intakes for them. But we also took on 225 new cases for people from 39 different countries. So this is in a year when immigration policy drastically changed, as I know you've talked about in the prior CLEs, when relief has become much more limited, and when a lot of attorneys, especially pro bono organizations, are having to take on less and less cases because there's just not the same resources and there's just not the same availability for relief as there used to be under prior administrations. So there's a bunch of ways to get involved with Las Americas. And as I said, I'm going to talk about Las Americas first, but I also want to talk about some of the ways you can get involved with other organizations who might be doing work that fits more within what you are interested in working on. So at Las Americas, we're split into two teams broadly, and both of our teams have volunteer projects. So there's a detained team and a non-detained team. Our detained team works with detained migrants at 3 different detention centers: the El Paso Processing Center, the Otero Processing Center in Otero, New Mexico, and the West Texas Detention Center in Sierra Blanca, Texas. So this involves providing intakes to literally hundreds of people every single year. So we are one of very few number of organizations that consistently serves all 3 of these detention centers, and our model is that we provide free intakes to every person who requests them. So that means hundreds of intakes. We have a staff member who just does intakes. However, as you can imagine, the volume of those intakes is so large that we really depend on volunteers to come in with us during non-pandemic times to physically come in and do these detained intakes with us and try and screen cases, get people the help that they need, either refer them in-house for representation or refer them to other appropriate attorneys. Or during the pandemic, because everything has essentially switched to remote work, we are currently able to set things up so that the detained intakes can take place over the telephone, which is just a reality that was not possible to us, 6 months ago before all of this happened. So right now we do have detained team volunteers who are doing just intake. So say they just do an hour or 2 every week. They're set up with a list of people to call for intakes. They get trained on how to complete the intakes, and then they're able to go through and actually talk with people who are in detention on behalf of Las Americas and screen these cases for us for potential representation with the detained team. The detained team, that's one great way for law students to get involved, because it doesn't involve actually having to go and take a case on. It's all about helping us on the back end come up with those cases that we're actually going to take for full representation. One thing to note is that for the detained intakes, Spanish fluency is almost required. If you have another fluency like Portuguese, that's also really beneficial. Or if you can team up with a Spanish speaker, oftentimes we'll get multiple folks together working on a team, one of whom has a Spanish proficiency and one of whom doesn't. So this is an area where you really do need a Spanish proficiency to get plugged in, but there are plenty of areas that don't, that we work on. For people who are barred, one of the areas that the detained team has had a ton of success with is placing these cases, good cases that are pretty clear cut, with pro bono attorneys who then are able to take on a full representation case and see it through the end of the court proceedings, right? So as we're doing all of these intakes, we're also screening folks for their possible relief. And while Las Americas takes on a lot of cases in-house, there's just always going to be more need than what we're able to meet, right? So we really do depend on pro bono attorneys. We have a network of pro bono attorneys that we refer these types of cases out to. And in that case, this type of full representation involves, meeting with the client, attending their hearings, but you're always doing that with the backing of Las Americas and with the support of our detained team that will walk you through the whole process of taking on these cases. And I will talk a little bit about that more in the following slides. And then in the non-detained team, you have essentially everything else that's not detained. So this is, you can see where we have our MPP project, where we represent people who are currently in the Remain in Mexico program. We also do affirmative and defensive asylum, so people who are seeking asylum in the immigration courts but who are not detained, luckily, or people who are affirmatively seeking asylum and are not in immigration removal whatsoever. But we also do all types of other petitions, so family petitions, humanitarian paroles. We do a lot of DACAs, which is very exciting now that there's some good news on the DACA front. But we also do things that are really important and compelling where we need a lot of volunteer help. For example, we have a bunch of special projects where we are working specifically, for example, with the victims of the Walmart mass shooting on U visas. And that's an area where we've been able to draw on our pro bono network of attorney to hook up our clients, all of whom were victims that day, and match them with a volunteer attorney who then helps us through the process of applying for a U visa so that they can stay in the United States. And Las Americas as a whole, we are a staff of about 21 people, but only 6 of us are attorneys. So this is, what we're doing is a lot of work with very little staff. And that's why volunteers are so important to the work that we're doing. So I talked a little bit about the two areas where we really need a lot of volunteer support, but I also wanted to talk about the different opportunities for lawyers versus law students versus people who have just been, perhaps have their degree but haven't been barred yet. As we know, since there's a little bit of chaos for the bar exam currently for those of you who are waiting to take it, thanks to COVID. So for those of you that are barred either in New Mexico or Texas or literally anywhere else, the great thing about immigration law, as I'm sure you learned, is that because it is federal, you don't need to be barred in the state in which you're practicing. There are some areas where being barred in federal court is a huge benefit to us because we really are trying to boost the amount of federal litigation that we do. But I wanted to talk about all the different ways that lawyers could get involved with us. So as I said, there's a huge need for full representation. And I know this sounds like a really huge undertaking, and I totally get it because as my life is doing these types of cases, I understand that they can be really overwhelming and really stressful. But I would encourage all of you, especially those of you in private practice, to take on a case as a sample. If you hook up with us at Las Americas and you tell me that you want to take on a case, you're going to have the backing of all of our staff attorneys, all of the resources that we have, all of the prior case knowledge that we have in order to go through and successfully complete that case. So it's definitely not a situation where we are asking folks to come in and take a case and go it alone into the new world of immigration court. This is something where you're going to have support every step of the way, from someone to talk to the clients, people to translate documents for you. All of that is well within our capabilities. What we need more of is just the legal mind and the legal capabilities and the bodies to physically show up in court and be there by a client's side as they go through these removal hearings. So for full representation, we're really talking about people who have the ability to take on a case at its early stages, whether that's someone who's in detention, maybe trying to get out on bond, or trying to do a full asylum representation, removal hearing, or for people who are currently in MPP. Right now, because of COVID-19, we have a lot of clients who we are working on relief for, but who are just kind of waiting for their ongoing hearings. And while we have some capacity to take on new cases as the staff attorneys, there are just always people with good cases that we're going to have to turn away. And when we can refer those people out to another attorney instead of turning them away, that's just, one more drop in the bucket of trying to solve some of the problems that lack of representation has created down on the border. Another thing that attorneys have helped us with that is really wonderful is partial representation. So this is great for folks who just can't make the commitment to be in court with a client, who can't come through in that way, but who might be able to take on a case and help us do the asylum research and create the drafts of the briefs and do kind of all of that back end work that allows us then the capacity to take on more cases, even if we're the ones appearing in court on their behalf. And then, as I kind of touched on before, there's also a real need in these special projects. So the U-Visa current project for victims of the mass shooting, we are still currently looking for volunteers who want to take on these U-Visa cases for USCIS, to be trained in how to work with survivors of trauma, to be trained in how to get all of the information needed for a U-Visa, and then actually work with us on submitting those applications as time goes on. And another special project that we're working on is actually trying to get people out of this Remain in Mexico program, out of the MPP program. So this is an area where we might be able to connect you with someone who has a humanitarian reason that they should be removed from MPP and assist you with creating a request to DHS to remove the person from the program and parole them into the United States so that they can pursue their case in the US, right? So really you can see that there's a lot of ways to plug in as an attorney, and I know personally from experience that it's really hard to take that leap and take on a case, but the attorneys that we've had do this have been really excited and satisfied by the experience. So I would encourage folks not to be too nervous about it. For example, just last year, we had 2 really huge pro bono successes from volunteer attorneys, both of whom literally just called up our office and were like, hey, I want to volunteer with you. We were able to, with the assistance of a volunteer attorney, release a man from detention who had been detained more than 5 years. And our volunteer attorney was able to go in and file a federal habeas petition and get our client out within 2 months after this man had been detained following an order of removal for such a long time. And that's something where, it may be he had to appear in court once and it maybe took total maybe 20 hours of work from this volunteer attorney, and now he has the satisfaction of knowing what a difference he made in this man's life. We've also been able to plug a lot of pro bono attorneys in with political asylum cases. So just last year, we had a huge win from a pro bono attorney who took on a Nicaraguan political asylum case. It was his very first entrance into the immigration world ever, and he was able to take that case all the way through the final hearing, and a judge in El Paso that has extremely low grant rates granted his client's application for asylum. And so you have this situation where people come in with a lot of hesitancy and a lot of fear, and once they take one of these cases, they're hooked, because there's truly no feeling, I think, that I have found quite like it, of when you actually can have some success in immigration court. But you don't have to be a licensed attorney in order to get involved on the border, right? So just as much at Las Americas, and for a lot of the other organizations I'm going to talk about, there's also a huge need for law students and law grads. So we work with law students from all over the country, but we actually have worked with very few law students from New Mexico, and that would be something that I'm really excited about changing, right? So down here in El Paso, we don't have a law school, and it's really important to us to try and continue those relationships and build this local-ish capacity so that we can start to create the types of immigration attorneys who are going to serve our communities and going to increase this capacity and start to make a dent in some of the ways that that immigration has so impacted the border community. So we work with law students on everything from a regular volunteer basis where they're not affiliating the internship with their school at all, to situations where they are doing an externship for class credit throughout the semester, to summer internships, and to things like alternative spring break. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different ways that law students can get involved. So one of the areas where we have a huge need right now is for this type of intake assistance. We have each week we provide intakes to the community where we go through and assess their immigration options and try and take as many cases as we can. And right now, because of COVID, all of that is taking place remotely. So we are looking for current law students who can help us screen folks, who can contact people, who can engage with us in those intakes. And that's something that would be like a 2-hour commitment weekly or every other week. And so this is just something where we are currently desperate for volunteers, and where we're seeing a real lack of assistance now that our summer interns are all leaving so that they can head back to school. And that's something where Spanish is super helpful, but we also do a lot of citizenship intakes, and so it's not necessarily totally necessary to be fluent in Spanish for that. The other thing is that we welcome interns from all across the country every summer, and sometimes not in summer. So some schools will do externships during the school year, and we are super flexible as far as working with your school to make sure that you're getting the credit and the supervision that you need. But also we are just so dependent on volunteers that it really is, you are coming to a place when you intern at Las Americas where you are engaging in real work. You're not doing the busy work of some other legal internships that might have, you're going to be receiving actual cases where you are working directly with clients, where you are doing the legal research and you are helping us figure out the legal strategy, because there's just no other way for us to meet this demand without bringing in as many hands as we can. And so this is a situation where you're going to see kind of the chaos of the non-detained world, but also be able to work really closely with clients, which is an experience that I am really happy that I had during my internship at Las Americas during law school. And as you can see, my internship during law school with Las Americas was so important to me that I ended up coming back and working here after law school. So, it really is somewhere where we get people who are repeat interns who enjoyed the experience so much that they want to come back and work in a different department. And then we also have a bunch of law students who help us with research and capacity support. So these are people who might help us create country conditions reports for clients, who might help us draft briefs or do legal research on a specifically complex claim. Or if we actually have a few law students who do things to increase our capacity through, helping us input new client information into our data systems and doing that sort of more administrative and clerical side of things. Really, if there is some skill that you have, I promise you that there is a way we can plug it in at Las Americas. But even if you are not in a position to volunteer yourself, there are still plenty of ways that you can get involved and assist us on the border. At Las Americas, we have grown over the past couple of years, but we are a small and scrappy nonprofit. So we have, a very small budget. We are a relatively small staff, and we, are all sharing our Adobe Acrobat accounts with each other and recycling and reusing all of our paper and, working within the confines of the nonprofit world. And that makes it harder to do your job, right? When you have to worry about resources, it is harder to do your job. And so it is really important to us that the community continues to fund this work. I know right now there is a literal pandemic, and it is not an option for a lot of people to set up a significant donation. But one thing that I really have found helpful for myself and for other people is setting up a small monthly reoccurring donation. You can do that through our website or through our Facebook, which I will have at the end of the slideshow for you all. But aside from monetary fundraising, there's a huge amount you can do to help us spread the word about Las Americas. So because we are so small and because we are located in El Paso, which is an area where historically there has not been a ton of attention paid despite its importance in the border conversation, a lot of people don't know about us and a lot of people don't know about the work that we're doing. So it is actually really very beneficial to us as a nonprofit and for our funding and for our clients, for us to be more visible, right? So if you can follow Las Americas on Twitter, follow us on YouTube, do all of the social media stuff that all of us millennials and Gen Zers are so good at, all of this helps us not only connect with more clients who need us, but also allows us to connect with larger funders who might not know about us because of our small status. The other thing you can do is refer other volunteers. Almost all of our out-of-state law student volunteers show up because someone else referred them, right? So if you work with us and you have a good experience, please tell your other law school friends about us, tell your colleagues, talk about what the experience was like and why it was meaningful for you, because almost all of those of our out-of-state volunteers come straight from referrals from prior volunteers, which is both a testament to the work, but also a testament to the real power there is in the word of mouth and getting people to come in and keep that pipeline of volunteers flowing. The other thing is that we have really streamlined our volunteer process. So in the past, if you have tried to volunteer with us, you might have sent an email and maybe got a response or maybe not gotten a response. But now, because of the increased interest in working on border issues, there really is a streamlined way to volunteer with Las Americas. There's an entire section on our website with FAQs and more explicit instructions, but I wanted to give you all the overview if you are interested. The very first thing you can do to learn about volunteering with us, aside from listening to me talk about it this hour, is to visit our website, and you can either go to lasamericas.org or go straight to the volunteer page, which is lasamericas.org/en/volunteer. And right there, you'll see the volunteer application, and you'll also see all of the possible ways you can work with Las Americas. And once you submit that volunteer application, we now have a volunteer coordinator who will actually reach out to you personally to talk with you about where the best fit might be, right? So if you're someone who's really interested in detained work, our volunteer coordinator is going to match you with the detained team if there's need from that team, so that we can have a mutually beneficial relationship where you are working on what you want to work on, and our teams are working with people who are really passionate about the area in which they're working. So once you're matched with a team or a project, so maybe the detained team or the U-Visa team, you will be in touch directly with the people who are working on that team, and you'll be plugged in to their volunteer project. We have a really robust community of volunteers who are all active on our WhatsApp group. So right now, because everything's remote, we're making a real effort to get people involved and chatting on a day-to-day basis so that they don't feel like they are alone in this, what can be a really difficult and trying experience of working on these issues. But of course, Las Americas, we are not the only one doing this work on the border. And so I wanted to plug a few of the other organizations that have come up with really innovative ways for people to get involved, whether you are doing so as a lawyer who wants to come in and work on direct representation, or as someone who perhaps doesn't want to use your legal skills at all and wants to help in other ways. So one project that we partner with directly is called EPIC. And so EPIC is a group of several immigration advocacy organizations on the border who are all trying to work together to change the way that immigration advocacy is done in the pro bono space. So EPIC right now, we have a project with them where we are reviewing the negative credible fear decisions in the detained context. So this is a situation that sounds complicated, but it's really not too bad, where people are coming in and they're given an interview by the asylum office, and the asylum officer essentially says, we think that you do have a credible fear of returning to your home country, or we think that you don't have a credible fear of returning to your home country. And we have a project with EPIC right now where we have a staff attorney whose entire job is to work with people who are getting these negative credible fear findings where the asylum office has said, no, we don't think that you have a credible fear, and working with the person to try and get a judicial review of that decision and overturn it so that the person can continue their asylum process with Las Americas. So this is something where there historically has been very, very little room for legal advocates because it's just so cloaked in secrecy. It's before people are even released into the United States. It's happening right at the border. And so EPIC has really allowed us to make an inroads into this area and help these people who otherwise would be deported right away with a negative credible fear finding. And so you can either work with EPIC through volunteering with us at Las Americas, but EPIC also takes volunteers themselves. Normally in non-COVID times, they accept volunteers who want to come down for 1 week or more and work physically in El Paso. But right now, again, everything is happening remotely. And you can visit their website here, and I will share a link to the PDF of this slideshow so that everyone has all of the links at the end. But EPIC is another area where, if you want to work on really innovative immigration representation, then I would highly suggest reaching out to EPIC and seeing where you can get plugged in there. If you are looking for something that's a little bit more low-key and not on the legal side, there's also an organization called AVID, which provides volunteer visitors and letter writers to people who are currently detained. So AVID volunteers work in both a kind of visiting capacity, but also in an advocacy capacity. So they will try to connect people with legal help. They will try to provide outside information to people who are stuck in the detention centers, all through the process of visiting or writing letters, right? So these are oftentimes retired folks who are looking to make sure that people are not essentially wasting away in the detention center without any communication. And so a lot of times we work with AVID in that they will refer clients directly to us, but we've also had volunteers who have worked with both AVID and with us. There's also the Fianza Fund. So the Fianza Fund is an organization born in El Paso and Juarez that works to get people out of immigration detention by paying immigration bonds. So the Fianza Fund is entirely volunteer run, and their biggest need, as with most things in life, is obviously for donations. The more donations they have, the more they can pay for people's freedom. But they also have a huge need for post-release support people. So these are people who might be able to transport people to where they need to be, to pick people up, to take them to the airport, to house them for a few days. And this is not something that needs to necessarily be El Paso specific, as because of the location of these 3 detention centers, oftentimes we get people who are ending up in various places in New Mexico. So it's not El Paso only. Another really amazing group to get involved with is the Asylum Sponsorship Project. We have worked with the Asylum Sponsorship Project extensively because essentially what they do is provide sponsors to people who are in detention who would otherwise not be eligible for release without a sponsor. So in order for someone to be bonded out of immigration detention, they have to show that they have someone who's going to house them and take care of them and that they have a stable address. But if someone doesn't have any family in the United States, they're essentially barred from being released from detention because they don't have that sponsor available. And so the Asylum Sponsorship Project has teamed up with willing people who have some extra space to house someone. And the Asylum Sponsorship Project then works directly with that family and with the person's attorney to set up a sponsorship situation. So we have had situations where we have had LGBTQ asylum seekers who fled their home country because they were being persecuted for their sexual orientation and who knew no one in the United States and had nothing. And we have had these amazing volunteers from the Asylum Sponsorship Project step up and sign up to be sponsors for our clients. And so we work really closely with these volunteer sponsors. And this is an area where you know, there is a commitment. You're inviting someone to live in your house, usually for 6 months or a year, but where the rewards can just be overwhelming because, you know, in almost all of these cases, this person would be wasting away in detention if not for the volunteer sponsor. For those of you who might be interested in going a little further down south on the border, I also wanted to plug ProBar, which is based in South Texas in Harlingen. And it's actually an ABA project, but they are also desperately seeking volunteers right now. Again, usually they request that people come down in person so that they can do detention center work with them. But right now, because of COVID, there are some remote opportunities available. I put the email address here, and again, I can share a link to the PDF of the slideshow. I put the email address here because their website is very non-intuitive, but you can also just search for ProBar and it will pull up the website. But they also are specifically looking for remote translators. So if you are a bilingual law student who has some spare time on your hands, you can easily assist with someone's asylum application by volunteering to be a volunteer translator and going through and helping that person translate their documents from Spanish into English. And that's something that can be, you know, just a few hours a week, at least when you're doing it for Las Americas. I won't speak for ProBar, but something that can be a few hours each week. But without it, someone would lose their asylum case, right? If your documents are not translated into English, they're rejected by the court. So this is something that seems like something really small, but actually has a huge impact on people's immigration cases. One other option, if you are unable to donate monetarily, but you might have some frequent flyer miles floating around, is the program called Miles for Migrants. We work really incredibly closely with them. in order to get people who are released from immigration detention centers home. So in this case, you can easily, very easily, I've tried it, donate any extra unused frequent flyer miles you might have directly to Miles for Migrants. And then when we as an organization are able to get people out of detention, we are able to request plane tickets from Miles for Migrants directly, and they provide us with plane tickets for our clients who are then able to fly home and be safely with their families. So this is just another area where, like, if you are not traveling because of COVID right now, please throw some frequent flyer miles this way. And I know we are just about out of time, so I just wanted to bring back up Las Americas and the process for getting involved here with us as far as onboarding, and then to answer any questions that people might have before our time is up. No one has questions because it was too much information. Oops. If people don't have questions, I just would encourage you also, I understand that it's really hard to take on something new. And if none of these things are within your capacity right now, I would really encourage you. The most important thing that I think that an average person can do on an everyday basis is just try to talk more about what's happening on the border and share actual, factual, reliable information about what is happening for immigrants and what is happening in immigration court on the border, because unless you know about it, you don't know about it. And there's so much misinformation floating around right now that having voices that can provide accurate information and share real facts is really beneficial to what we're trying to do. 2 questions, it looks like. So we do have some translators to match with English only attorneys. The capacity is not always there, but we've been trying to beef that up, especially now for remote work. It's a little more flexible. So if you are an English only speaking attorney, please do reach out to us, because there are either English specific tasks that you can do still in the legal world, or we can try to find you a volunteer translator. Another thing is that we often have clients who speak a non-Spanish language, and in that case, we do have access to the language line translation system. So if you are an English-speaking attorney only, we might be able to match you, for example, with a Portuguese-speaking client or an indigenous language speaker in that case, where we would be using a translating service anywhere. And yes, I will definitely share the PDF version of this PowerPoint so that you all can have the links and the information about volunteering. And each of the websites that I listed has more information than I gave about the volunteer opportunities. Any other questions?
Brooke, this is Jessie. I have a question.
Yes.
As someone who volunteered before for Las Americas, what can you say, I guess, give folks an idea of, I guess, your biggest takeaway or the biggest takeaways that practicing attorneys have when they give some of their time?
You cut out a tiny bit just at the beginning. Sorry, can you say it one more time?
Yeah, as someone who yourself volunteered for Las Americas before you started working there, can you just talk a little bit about maybe what you had as your primary takeaway, or what practicing attorneys that you work with say is their kind of most common takeaway of their volunteer experience?
Yeah, definitely. So I did myself volunteer at Las Americas, and now after having worked at Las Americas, I have worked myself with many volunteer attorneys, and there's a couple things that really commonly come up that definitely align with my experience. So when I volunteered at Las Americas, I came away with just this overwhelming understanding that I had been completely lacking regarding what the asylum system looks like, as well as how easy it is to make a difference, right? So it's easy to see the asylum system as something, and the immigration system at large, as something that is just so opaque and so hard to overcome that it doesn't even seem like there's any inroads. But when you come in on the ground and are plugged in with a team of attorneys, you can see those inroads. And so you can start to learn like, oh, if I can just file a bond motion and show up for a bond hearing, something that might take 5 hours of my time, I can get someone out of immigration detention. So I think one of the overarching things has just been learning about how you actually can make a difference and seeing those inroads as opposed to seeing the system as just like opaque and impenetrable. So 2 more questions that I see. I will answer those briefly in our last few minutes. So does all immigration work for the US need to be processed through US attorneys? So someone doesn't necessarily need an immigration attorney, right, in order to go through immigration court. However, if you're not licensed in the United States, you cannot practice immigration law in the United States. We have had international lawyers who have volunteered with Las Americas who have worked with us in like legal research capacities and things like that. But yes, so if someone has a lawyer in the United States, that person does need to be licensed in some state of the United States in order to practice immigration law in the US. That being said, it also works vice versa. So while we represent people in MPP, we do not represent people in, for example, claims for Mexican asylum. We're referring all of those types of situations to our colleagues who are actually barred in Mexico. The other question is housing for attorneys who come down to El Paso. So luckily El Paso is pretty affordable and there are Airbnb options for attorneys who come down. People have said that has been their best bet. We've had some people who stay in hotels, but most folks have chosen to stay in Airbnbs. Because of our super small capacity, we are not able to provide much support when it comes to finding housing, although we do have an ongoing list of places where prior volunteers have stayed that they have been comfortable in. Oh, there's 2 more that I didn't see. Okay, so federal, what does MPP stand for? That's a really good question. And I try to not get stuck in the acronyms, but I lose my track sometimes. MPP is Migrant Protection Protocol. So this is the program otherwise known as Remain in Mexico that the Trump administration implemented last year, where now asylum seekers on the border are being forced to wait in Mexico for their asylum hearing dates in the United States. So this is the program that's creating these essentially migrant camps along the border. And the process for being admitted to the federal bar, I have only been admitted to the Western District of Texas, and that experience was surprisingly easy. You don't have to take an exam or anything. You submit your application directly to the court, and then you just need someone who is currently a member of the federal bar to vouch for your I guess, moral turpitude, to use an immigration phrase, and who will come and swear you in front of the federal judge. So in my experience, it was not an overly overbearing process, but it can be a little intimidating because it does involve a lot. It does involve a lot of calling the clerk of the court and setting up lots of paperwork and lots of appointments for swearing in. And I would encourage everyone who is even a little bit interested in doing federal litigation on immigration just to go ahead and start working on getting sworn into the federal bar right now, because honestly, that is one of our #1 needs, is more attorneys who are sworn in federal court and who can help us do things like these habeas petitions that are just right now outside of our capacity. And there's not a lot of volunteer attorneys who are barred in federal court. So we do have so many cases that are coming to us where people who have been detained for months and months after their final order of removal, but who, don't necessarily have relief, but might have a habeas case. And the only way to pursue that is through federal court. So there really is a huge need for volunteer attorneys who are barred in federal court. And in my experience, the application process itself was not too overbearing. So I would encourage you to look into it. And if you're interested in being barred in West Texas, you can definitely reach out to me and I can talk more about my experience. Jesse Miles' mother-in-law actually swore me into the federal bar in the El Paso small town type of feel.
This is Jesse. I wanted to say, to folks that are listening to that Las Americas has done an impeccable job, I think, of being nimble and trying to meet the needs that are currently happening at the border, but that these are needs that are always changing, and they change with different policies that come in, and they change with different administrations and things like that. So, you know, like Brooke is talking about our need for folks who practice federal law to be involved in habeas. That's not necessarily something that we needed a year ago, or even really 6 months ago as much. And so I'd also just encourage folks that are excited about volunteering, but maybe don't think that this is the right time or that there's not the right fit, to check back in 3 or 6 months with Brooke at Las Americas or with us at the law school, and find out, you know, what would fit your particular circumstance really well, because these needs are ever evolving and ever changing with kind of the revolving policies that the Trump administration has been throwing at migrants.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, and that's something that we have really truly grown to love our volunteers so much, is because we have volunteers who come in and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And we're like, that sounds weird. We've never done that before. And then we're like, oh my God, we should have an entire program that helps people prepare for their credible fear interviews, right? We created this CFI credible fear interview preparation program because a volunteer came in and started it, right? So if you are excited about working on the border and you're excited about these issues, please contact us, even if you're like, I don't want to do any of the things that you just mentioned, because I promise you there's a way that we can plug you in to make the connection between what you do want to work on and what there's a need for in our office.
Okay, I think with that we can wrap it up. I want to thank Brooke for this wonderful presentation, and Jesse for your input today, and to thank all of you for attending. This is Patrick Lopez, the career advisor at the law school, and we've been very proud and happy to participate in this excellent CLE series, and I hope it's been beneficial, and I really sincerely hope that we get some good volunteers out of this and to get people involved. That's really the main goal that we've had all along. So I just also want to remind each of you, if you would like to CLE credits, to send the form to Sue George. Her email address is on the form. If you need the CLE form, send an email to Cheryl Burbank to receive the form. Her email has been posted in the chat. As well as Sue George's email is in the chat as well. And so with that, we will sign off, and thank you so very much for attending, all of you.
Thank you all so much. And my email address is on the screen, and I will share the PDF of the slideshow. But please, if you have questions about volunteering or don't want to fill out a volunteer application yet, please, you can feel free to email me directly and I'll get back to you right away. Thank you all so much.